Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and broadcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm privileged to welcome a very, very senior corporate professional from New Delhi, India, Mr. Ankur Sachdeva. Ankur, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm delighted to be on this show.
Thank you. Ankur is the President Operations of Radico Khaitan Limited. And for those who don't know, Radico Khaitan is one of the leading companies in alcohol, plus I'm sure there are many other businesses. So Ankur, before I get into branding and all the stuff that you're doing, from plywood to alcohol, tell me about your journey to the top and some of your learnings and challenges.
Brilliant. So Ashutosh, this is one question that I've been asked most often, because both these two industries are at the opposite end of the spectrum.
Correct.
But I think what's important is to get the sequence right. So chronologically, 18 years I was in the liquor industry from the year 2001 to 2018.
Okay.
And then I pivoted to building material, and I'll tell you why I did that transition just in a while. But 4 years spent in the wood panel industry, which is part of the building material industry, and then have now recently come back to the liquor fold again. And I've been there now for 5 months again, back to the same company that I left back in 2018. Why this is important is that to emphasize that maximum learnings that I had, and no learnings happen without challenges, and therefore the personal growth comes from there. The maximum learnings I had was when I did the first pivot, which is from the liquor industry to the wood panel industry. So this transition, which was quite deliberate, I might add, happened because I decided that, I'd spent too long a time in the same industry, and I'd done some great assignments and projects, but to some extent, I was even acknowledged as an expert, say in some aspects of the industry that I was in, be it on-premise or single malt whiskies or travel retail. And it was this familiarity that is what was making it a bit dull for me. I found myself questioning that, have I become too comfortable? Have I stopped growing? I was going through FOMO with all around me, my colleagues and associates trying new ventures. So I thought, why can't I do this? Don't I have the courage to do this? And just as then as if the gods were listening to me, I got approached by Kajaria Ceramics, to start a new wood vertical for them, wood panel vertical for them. Personally, I had zero knowledge of that domain, and I think at some level that was exactly what that the draw for me was, because I was completely new to it. And I said, what the heck, I'm ready for an adventure, and let's go for it. And that's what happened. So in the year 2018, when I did this pivot, very quickly, just as we started, realized that there are lots of challenges, and those challenges mostly lay in our assumptions. And these assumptions, they began to unravel very soon after we started the business. I don't want to get too technical about the wood panel industry, but just to say that, it has a very dominant unorganized sector, which is almost 3/4 of the total industry. And also realize that the existing retail channel of the company of Kajaria was not going to work for plywood and laminates. And last but not the least, I think we had an asset-light model, not just for manufacturing, but also for, say, stocking. And this was really very unusual for the trade. So in that sense, we were pioneering a new way of doing things in a very traditional industry. So on our part, we had to be dynamic and nimble-footed. It was enormously helpful that, we were part of a large corporate group that made it relatively easier to deal with these challenges.
Fascinating. And then you came back to alcohol, to Radico Khaitan.
Yeah, absolutely. Came back to alcohol and back to Radico Khaitan. I've been there now for 5 months. But I think the important point is that, and that's the learning from there, is that, I realized that it's very important to be aligned with the promoter who's putting the risk capital into the business and the execution team. I think that was my biggest learning, because that helped us stay in good stead, and we were able to overcome many of those challenges that I mentioned earlier. And I think the second learning was team selection. And this is an important point, and I think your listeners may gain from this, is that, the attitude and mental makeup of employees that get a stationary train to start moving vis-a-vis, say, someone boarding a running train are two very different things. So that was a very key takeaway for me. And I think there was another important learning and that was where my personal internal growth came from, that the basic skill sets of team building, motivating, stitching up business partners, managing expectations up and down, are all, in fact, transferable in nature from one industry to another. So this helped my self-confidence grow a great deal.
Fascinating, fascinating. So let's now move, Ankur, to Radico Khaitan. Tell me about some of your popular brands.
Yeah, so Radico Khaitan is a full spectrum Indian liquor industry player. It's the largest Indian spirits company.
Wow.
Our brands, we sell in over 87 countries, and we do about 27 million cases. Annual revenues are in excess of $450 million US per annum. The most popular brands, many of them you may have heard of, are 8 PM Whiskey, Morpheus Brandy, 1965 Spirit of Victory Rum. Then we have Magic Moments Vodka, of course. We're the largest vodka marketeer in the country. And very recently, we've also launched Rampur Indian Single Malt Whiskey. I'm sure you have one of those in your bar.
I have that in my bar.
Avid malt collector. And then there is Jaisalmer Indian Craft Gin that has also been recently launched.
It's interesting. I purchased a bottle of Rampur, not at duty free or in India, but in the US. And I said, Indian whiskey, I've got to carry it back. But tell me, Ankur, what goes into building a successful alcohol brand?
Right. I'm not sure if we have enough time on the show to to cover that topic, but I'll hit on a few key points. Actually, building a successful alcohol brand is really no different from building any brand, say, be it automobiles or FMCG. And I think there lies, so there are some common themes, I'd say. And for me, the most important ingredient for success is authenticity.
Okay.
Today's consumers, they're very discerning. They see right through any BS that you may throw at them. Quality and value for money are a given. But I think in the case of liquor especially, I think a unique story that the consumer identifies himself with is the most critical ingredient, in my opinion.
Okay.
This story needs to be told in a place, manner, and time that is easily accessible to the target consumer. The other important element is customer centricity. Our consumers are evolving all of the time, and so is the nature of competition and the environment that you operate in. So it becomes extremely critical for the brand to constantly move in terms of packaging, features, and communication, to stay relevant to that consumer or to attract new ones for that matter.
And the reason I also wanted to know this about building brands is because there is a restriction on the way you can communicate.
Yeah.
So that becomes an even bigger challenge, isn't it?
Correct. You're absolutely right, Ashutosh. I think you're alluding to the whole, enigma of surrogate advertising and all the questions around that. So, it's a dark environment. That's no secret. And, traditional advertising, therefore, is not available to alco bev industry. And the regulatory framework is very rigid on this point.
Correct.
As far as I'm concerned, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I see that as an opportunity. Because, it's very, big fat advertising budgets, bulldozing the consumer mindset is what, traditionally an FMCG player might do. But I think in the liquor industry, just because, we have to be a little more creative than that, brands have to do that extra work, whether it's on the ground or at point of sale, in order to woo the customer. So, classical in-shop at merchandising, bars or club events, promotions, sponsorships. These are some of the tools that are available to the liquor marketers to create your awareness, trial, and ultimately loyalty.
Well said.
Interestingly, I think since you asked the question, I think I should do justice to it and break it down perhaps into two segments. There is a nuanced difference whether it's a premium brand or a mass brand. So premium brands are primarily built on packaging, top shelf placement, and like I mentioned earlier, the story behind the origin of the product is very important. PR, brand ambassadorial work also add to that. In the premium space, I often say a well-told story wins the day. On the other hand, mass brands, here more than the brand story, consumers associate with the price point.
Correct.
The core message must resonate with their aspiration. And every marketer has his or her own secret sauce.
Absolutely.
It sets them apart. I have mine too.
Absolutely right. Well said. And yet, as I've seen in the tobacco business and in my ITC days, and now you're talking about alcohol. Alcohol is probably one of the finest price laddered product. You've got an alcohol for virtually every price segment.
True.
And yet consumer tastes determine a lot. So my question to you is, what determines customer tastes in alcohol?
Wow. Okay. So generally speaking, consumers, and I think this is true world over, young consumers typically start with RTDs and beer. So let's say low alcohol spirits, low alcohol beverages. This is before they move to hard spirits. In the Indian context, typically, as you correctly said, it's very laddered. So each subcategory or flavor has its own consumption characteristics.
Correct.
So a broad distinction is white spirits and dark spirits. And I'll address each one of these to help you, your listeners understand this better. But white spirits, that's vodka and gin. It's a very small category within the overall IMFL basket. IMFL is a old British coinage which stands for Indian made foreign liquor.
Correct.
So white spirits are typically used for daytime drinking and making cocktails. And sometimes you'll be surprised to know, even to escape the smell of the spirit itself.
Absolutely.
Vodka and gin, therefore, are more versatile and they lend themselves to be mixed with other ingredients. Dark spirits, on the other hand, dark spirits defined as whiskey, brandy, and rum, they connote more serious drinking in a traditional sense.
Okay.
And these comprise the lion's share of the Indian spirits industry. And then there are a lot of typical things like whiskey is an all-season category for a slightly more mature palate. Whereas dark rum has a sense of a very macho entry-level drink and evokes images of the Indian armed forces. Overall, dark spirits record a spike, I'd say, in the winter season. But I'm making very broad, sweeping, general statements, and I think there are many breakaway trends, and I think that's an interesting thing to think about, because women drinkers are a very growing segment, and it's not just wine; it's gin, single malts, and people are drinking more quality instead of quantity now. Then there is this whole trend of small craft, artisanal, batch distilled spirits. So we as marketeers, we tend to take a customized portfolio approach and to cater to all these varied segments.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think one very big trend, Ashutosh, and I'm sure it's you'll probably identify even yourself with, that it's often not one or the other. Many of us have many different categories of spirits in our repertoire. Correct. So on different occasions or time of the day, we'll find something else more suitable, and that makes our job very dynamic and interesting.
No, you're so right. I mean, I enjoy my alcohol, and I have 2 small drinks every day, and I switch between whiskey to rum to vodka to gin, sometimes to tequila, and then move back. So you're absolutely right. But Ankur, tell me, I've increasingly seeing Indian whiskeys being sold in international duty-free places and international stores. I'm seeing friends overseas beginning to talk about Indian whiskeys. What is happening to whiskeys in India, and why is there such a big interest?
Great question, Ashutosh. I'm sure you're not complaining. This is great.
Not at all.
And the brand of
Not
India.
At all. Absolutely.
So I think the consumer is evolving, and so is the quality of Indian whiskey. India, not many people would know, but India is ranked as the 3rd largest consumer of whiskey in the world.
Okay.
Whiskeys, as I mentioned earlier, whiskeys made in India are known as the IMFL category, Indian made foreign liquor category. Yeah. And this is being received extremely well in the international market of late, as you said. In fact, many Indian companies are now making single malts. Correct. And these have a huge demand, not only in the international market, but also in the domestic market. So single malts, as you know more than anyone else, is that they are considered or perceived to be more superior to blended whiskeys. And these cannot be mass produced. So lately, several Indian single malt brands have even won global recognition and awards. So very interestingly, India's overall warm climate actually accelerates the maturation process and the aging process, which makes the Indian whiskeys tend to be a little younger than their, let's say, Scottish or Irish counterparts. Traditionally, and this is a very important point where I'm noticing over the last 1 decade or so, why Indian whiskeys are getting more popular. Previously, majority of the Indian whiskeys were made, were a distillate of molasses. And then the trend changed towards grain-based whiskeys, and which is the norm in, say, Europe or the US. Right. So this, in my view, is contributing to the overall quality and popularity, therefore, of Indian whiskey globally.
Fascinating. This is not my time to talk too much, but I have to tell you this one story. Last month in New York, I was at a bar with a very dear friend, and I asked him, I said, give me a different whiskey. And he said, you want to try something Indian? I said, show me the bottle. And he showed me a Rampur, which I did have a drink from.
Music to my ears.
Absolutely.
Keep speaking.
And I told him I'm going to be speaking to the boss in a few, in a month or so. So wonderful. But now coming back to you, and I'm sorry for this digression. Another interesting trend I have noticed, and maybe I'm wrong, is that when it comes to premium whiskeys, Indian companies launch them in international markets first before coming to the Indian market. Why is this?
So Ashutosh, I think you're more wrong here than right.
Okay.
I fear.
Okay.
Why I say that is that there may be a case or two where high-end premium brands have actually followed the route that you just suggested, and there the reason could be very tactical, or maybe the company felt that the domestic demand isn't there yet, so that can be it. But I'd say in the last 5 years or so, Indian consumers, the kind of upgrading that I have seen during this whole COVID time, and people, really use their home bars extensively. I think a lot of upgradation has happened, and we are going through a double-digit growth of premium brands launched in India. It's massive. I haven't seen that. It's unprecedented. I mean, I've been in this industry for over 2 decades, and what I have seen in the last 3 to 5 years is completely mind-boggling. And I think it's helped by the fact that some taxes have come down, domestic taxes have come down. Consumers are spoiled for choice, and both Indian or international spirits, both are booming, Ashutosh.
Absolutely. Well said. So Ankur, I have time for 2 more questions. One related to alcohol and then one a general question.
Sure.
I'm also seeing that a lot of young people, and when I say young people, I'm including both my sons who live in Singapore and America and all their friends. They seem to be drinking gin primarily. What is the reason for this amazing popularity for gin? And I know you have yours as well, Jaisalmer.
Correct. Absolutely. This has to be one of my favorite questions, Ashutosh.
Okay.
Why I say this is because, I used to be a single malt drinker, but now I've really taken to gin. We have our own Jaisalmer gin, of course. But on a general level, I'd say that gin has been growing all over the world, actually, especially in Spain and the UK. Those are the 2 largest gin markets. And, you very well know how many Indians are travel to these places. So it was no surprise and just a matter of time before this trend caught up in India too. But I mean, as far as the reasons why gin is now taking off, or rather I'll be more specific, Indian gin is taking off, or gin in India is taking off. I can think of a variety of reasons. Firstly, I think gin is a versatile drink. One can enjoy it straight, on the rocks, or as a base for a cocktail.
Correct.
Also, with the rising number of bars, gin is a favorite base for any bartender to mix with. You see, the flavor of, the variety of flavors in gin can be pushed into countless directions.
I see. Okay.
To create different styles of drinks, and the industry is full of very creative distillers. I have a quote that not really a quote, but a statement that I make often is that, there is a gin and a gin drink for everyone. It's just about experimenting and discovering what you like. So this holds very true. The other reason I'd say is that there have been a lot of gin-centric events. There's one that I can think of, which is Gin Fest, which is one among many, but they've been generating excitement, and that's what's fueling the category's growth as well.
Wow.
At one of the Gin Fests in Delhi that I attended, I was amazed to see the number of women trying gin-based cocktails. Actually, it was even more than men, which is a very encouraging trend for marketeers. And I think the last point that I can think of is that there are a number of locally produced craft gin brands that have just exploded. India is a country best suited to experiment with botanicals, considering how rich our culinary heritage is. So I think for those reasons, I feel gin has a very good future in India.
Fascinating. And Ankur, my last question to you, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your vast experience as a marketer in India and looking at so many different brands, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from your own journey and from our conversation?
Right. So Ashutosh, I will answer that one, though I'll steer away from the professional side of it, but have more generic, advice, if you will. So right in the beginning, I spoke about a career pivot that I made in search of self-fulfillment, if you will.
Yeah.
It took enormous courage, but I had a certain wanderlust in me, and fortunately for me, I landed on my feet and came out successful on the other side. But you also mentioned that the majority of your viewers are in their 20s and 30s, and have at least 2 or more decades of working life ahead of them.
Yeah.
So I can draw on my professional and personal journey and talk about these some general idea as to, you said 3, so okay, let's keep it down to 3. So first and foremost, I think find your purpose.
Yeah.
We are always evolving. Not everyone can be great at being a writer, musician, athlete, or a 9-to-5 employee, or an entrepreneur. I was very fortunate to find my calling at an early age.
Correct.
And sticking to it made me happy and successful. But far too many times I come across people who are just kind of, miserable in their professions. And so therefore my first advice to them is that find your purpose and don't be afraid to take 2 steps back temporarily to go ahead 10 steps in the long term.
Well said.
Couple of decades ahead of them. So this is a small risk.
Absolutely.
And my second advice that flows in from the first is that once you have defined your purpose, then the sincerity of intent is important, which basically means committing to your cause.
Correct.
Remove any self-doubts and really put yourself out there so that the universe is forced to conspire to give you what you seek.
Well said.
The last point is grit. It's the one trait that beats everything else, in my opinion. Grit is perseverance and persistence.
Yeah.
No matter how many times you fall, you stand up again and again.
Wonderful. Ankur, on that note, and your 3 lessons, find your purpose, sincerity of intent is very critical, and grit beats everything. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about your amazing journey, about your pivot, and also about all the learnings you've had as a marketer in the world of alcohol. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you for having me on the show, Ashutosh. It was my first podcast, I should add. I actually enjoyed it. Hope your audience also enjoys it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.